What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. D. Culiante. And look, guess what? We are back with another video. We are continuing with the book Will. All right, so I got a chance to read chapter 1 of Will. This chapter is called Fear. Now, off the title alone, I'm like, okay, what are we about to get into? So yeah, definitely that title kind of took me by surprise a little bit by calling it Fear. And I'm starting to kind of like the trend because the first one, like the prequel, was called The Wall. I'm like, okay, so very kind of, even in the names of the chapters are very like statement like names, like The Wall, Fear. And he goes right in. So when the first thing that jumped out was he starts by saying, I've always thought of myself as a coward. And you're thinking like, what? Who has the... First of all, we're talking about Will Smith here. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about Man in Black. We're talking about Fresh Prince, Bad Boys. And you're telling me that you always considered yourself to be a coward? It just doesn't make sense. So that was kind of like the first thing that kind of stood out to me. But he says it because he kind of sets the tone. He talks about how like he didn't stand up and protect his mother. So that's how he starts off like the first page. He calls himself a coward because he wasn't able to protect his mother of his pops. So in that prequel that I talked about in the last video, I give you that whole thing of the wall and stuff. So you kind of get an idea that his dad is very like straightforward. And in this chapter, Fear, you get to kind of know his pops a little bit more. Basically, his pops just had a up and down type of childhood. Came from some decent parents, but he was always kind of like the outcast person. You know, never really like rules like that. He actually did spend some time in the military, and but ended up leaving and starting his own business, which is kind of cool. That lets you know that his pops was definitely smart, has some employees working under him, and they end up he ended up meeting his Will Smith's mother. His mom had like a college background, and they end up moving to Philadelphia. I guess they got married in Niagara Falls, and then they got a crib in like West Philadelphia, just like the song. So that's pretty much like how the parents met and stuff like that. So a couple of things that stood out to me in this chapter was they do a good job kind of illustrating like the living environment. So he says he kind of this I highlighted this part right here. So he talks about how like times were good and people were clearly having sex a lot. My middle class upbringing contributed to constant criticism I took in my early rap career, which, you know what I'm saying, he kind of goes into talking about how, in this part that I highlighted, how like he grew up in a kind of a two-parent household, but like he was always kind of criticized about being kind of like a corny rapper and stuff like that. And he just hated that. And it kind of made him kind of feel like a coward. So you kind of hear in this part right here how that central idea of being a coward of this chapter is kind of like traveling, stuff like that. But yeah, he kind of grew up in West Philadelphia. So, especially back in the 70s, so a lot of black people was in the Midwest during that time. And it was a lot going on during that time too. And I kind of took away some stuff too. So in this next page, he talks about a bombing that took place in this neighborhood, which was called the Move bombing. So it's the 70s. So this is kind of the end. Look, Dr. King died in 68. You know what I'm saying? JFK died a year before that. So I guess the black movement in that time was kind of like just changing and evolving because a lot of the black leaders was getting assassinated. So you had a lot of stuff going on, especially like with black movements in this time. So one specifically, they talk about there was like a family that lived in the neighborhood that Will Smith lived in, and they, I guess the police were trying to apprehend him. So they shot up. This is in Will Smith's neighborhood. Like literally, he talks about how it was so close to his house, but they literally like shot up this house. The police shot up this house and literally dropped a bomb on top of the house, which blew up and killed like 5 children and 6 adults, and 2 entire city blocks. 65 homes were burnt to the ground. So this is in his neighborhood. So I just thought that was wild. You know what I'm saying? Because even though like you hear like Will Smith talk about his pops and how he was just like so like militant and stuff like that. I mean, in that time, like, especially being like a black person, like it was probably hecka tough. Cause it's so much going on. Like it's so much like racism and like people are fighting for rights left and right. And this is the 70s. So it's like you're just coming off the end of all the 60s era. So much went down in the 60s, and now we're in the 70s, the early 70s. So like I can see black parents like doing the best they can to prepare their kids during that time. And you had to be tough on them because you can easily go out and die in the streets, whether that's by police officers or by like a random person. You probably wouldn't get the justice that you will receive today. So I just thought that was interesting, that such a big movement. You can actually look it up on the internet. That's what I ended up doing. Move bombing. And it took place in Will Smith's neighborhood, which I thought was interesting. One thing that I thought was another takeaway was that Will Smith talked about how his dad was so militant and that everything was a mission to him. So doing your homework, getting the kitchen clean, that was a mission. And he lived by this creed that said, when I send you on the mission, there are 2 possibilities. 1, you complete the mission, or 2, you are dead. Do you understand me? Right? I just think that's interesting. And I think that's the type of mindset you gotta have if you're a parent in the 70s. Like, you're either gonna follow my rules or you have the possibility of putting your life in jeopardy being out here, like being a knucklehead and stuff like that. So definitely, like, it's kind of crazy, but like our parents definitely paved the way for us to be, you know what I'm saying, who we are today. So, okay, that's my little Black History rant and stuff like that. But let me get back to this idea of fear that Will Smith talks about. So I highlighted this, which I thought was kind of cool. So Will Smith's dad is pretty aggressive and he's abusive to his mom too. He talks about this in the story. But one thing that I thought was cool, that he said that it made him bring out his emotional awareness, which made him become a great actor. Will Smith and Ben Ali, freaking Serena Williams and Venus' dad, like he's a great actor. But to know that the trauma that he went through as a kid made him become emotionally aware. So he talks about, he says in his book, chapter 1, this emotional awareness has stayed with me throughout my life. It has served me well as an actor and a performer. I could easily recognize and comprehend and emulate complex emotions long before I knew that people would pay me for it. I thought that was dope. You know what I'm saying? This guy, Will Smith, is definitely a smart guy. So I thought that was cool. So I'm going to finish this video by talking about the 3 things about his siblings. So there was an incident in this chapter where Will Smith's dad kind of loses his cool and like starts abusing his mom. And Will Smith has 3 siblings living at the house, right? He has his brother Harry, he has his sister Ellen, and there's him. So there was, like I said, there's something that took place, and his siblings all reacted differently. So Harry was like the fighter. And he talks about how like his sister Ellen was like with when that stuff was going on. So okay, let me back up. So when that stuff happened, Harry was the fighter. Harry stood up to his dad. Harry protected the mom. This is Will Smith's little brother. So he always kind of had to be that fighter, that tough guy. That's kind of how his like emotional like response was to that trauma going on in the house. So Will Smith writes, Harry, despite being only 6 years old, he tried to intervene and protect his mother. He would do so many times over the coming years, sometimes successfully, but that night, Daddy-O just shoved him away. My brother intervened, got my mother's lesson about pain. Harry had discovered that untouchable place within himself. That place where you could hit me as much as you wanted, but you could never hurt me. So that was Harry's kind of thing. You could hit me as much as you want, Pops, but you could never hurt me. That's a fighter's mentality right there. So that's who Will Smith's little brother was. You know what I'm saying? And then you have Ellen. So Ellen, during that whole trauma episode, Ellen withdrew herself. So she went and hid under the covers. And Will Smith talks about how Ellen withdrew not only from Daddy-O, but from the rest of the family. Years later, her withdrawal will result in outright rebellion. She'd stay out all night, drinking, smoking, and wouldn't even bother to call and say where she was at. So, you know, when you talk about trauma, like everybody reacts differently. So Will Smith's sister was like, I just want to stay away from all this. And because she didn't know how to handle that trauma, she turned to like drugs and like people and stuff like that. And I think that's a common thing. I think everybody kind of reacts in their own way. So he finishes off by talking about himself, right? He said, I wanted to please him because as long as Dad was laughing and smiling, I believe we were safe. I was the entertainer in the family. I would keep everything light and fun and joyful. And while this psychological response would later bear artistic and financial fruits, it also meant that my little 9-year-old brain processed Daddy-O's abuse episode as somehow being my fault. So Will Smith, being the fearful guy, he played the role of, okay, I have to be the person who keeps the family laughing, keeps my dad laughing, because as long as he's laughing and he's smiling, my whole family is safe. My mom is safe, my brother and sister are safe, and he's the oldest. So this is how that's how he reacts to like his dad's abusive of nature and stuff like that. So that was kind of like the biggest takeaway for me, was to know that like the emotional responses to like trauma. One can be you become a fighter. The other one is you withdraw, turn to other things to kind of like help you cope with the trauma. And then the other one is that you're always like the guy who takes that as fault, like that's my fault, and has to become like the people pleaser. And you know what I'm saying? And, okay, I got to do this because I got to people please because I don't want stuff to go wrong because I'm gonna feel like it's my fault. And I honestly feel like in today's society, there are a lot of people who kind of fall into them categories. And I just find that interesting. You know what I'm saying? I find that interesting that, you know, yes, you know, Will Smith turned that into a career and stuff like that, but to know like during that time, homie was scared. And that's the best way he knew how to react. And to know that all these people live in the same house, but they all react differently to trauma. So I just thought that was cool. So basically that was chapter 1, Fear, in a nutshell. At least that's some of the things that stood out to me. So that is pretty much it. So tune in for chapter 2. We're just getting started. I'm excited. Let me know in the comments if you got your hands on your book, Will. If you're reading this, You know what I'm saying? Let me know if there was any takeaways from this video. Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and we'll be back with another video. You dig? Out.